Class of 2017, and families and friends, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Bonnie Arnold from the College of Communication class of 1978.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. It's good to be back in Boston. I came to BU in 1977. I had never lived outside of my home state of Georgia. My Southern accent was a little heavier then, but Jimmy Carter had just become President of the United States, and having a Southern accent was very fashionable. I decided to make that my calling card. But seriously, thanks to Dean Fiedler for not only inviting me here today, but also for keeping me involved as an alumni. And my first piece of advice today is to tell you that if you do the same, you'll be glad you did. All across America, commencement speakers are talking to graduates about the journey they're about to take. But the journey I want to talk about is not a physical one. Neither is it metaphorical. Rather, the journey I'm going to focus on is a journey of vocabulary. To be precise, it is the journey from the word no to the word yes. This is a journey I have been on, though I certainly didn't realize it at the beginning when I was sitting right where you are. For you, the journey begins tomorrow when you leave this amazing place. Your lives are going to change a lot. During your time here, you've learned from top professors. You've been surrounded by smart, like-minded peers, all while living in one of the world's most exciting cities. Those of you who are filmmakers have gotten to direct, write, and edit projects you're passionate about. Aspiring journalists have covered stories of personal interest. Marketers have designed innovative PR campaigns. And all along the way, you've gotten to say no. No to classes that didn't interest you. No to projects you didn't care for. No to internships that didn't provide the right experience. Well, for the meantime, I suggest you lock up the word no in a little box. Just don't lose the key. This is certainly what I did. After graduation, I returned to my much less cosmopolitan hometown of Atlanta and quickly learned that my expectations and the reality of available job possibilities were no match for the opportunities Boston had offered. I had to say yes to anything that even slightly related to what I thought I wanted to do. One of the first jobs I said yes to was driving a 15-passenger van. As you can see from looking at me, I needed help just getting into the driver's seat, and I could barely see over the steering wheel. The job was to chauffeur a team scouting locations in North Georgia for the film The Mosquito Coast. The group consisted of 9 guys, including producer Saul Zantz, director Peter Weir, and an actor named Harrison Ford. When I met them at the airport, the first thing they asked me if I was old enough to drive. That was a yes. We spent several days on the road. I did my best, and all the while, I listened and observed. There were lots of late-night discussions about the story and the plans for the movie. Anytime there was an opportunity to offer an opinion or an idea, I made sure to chime in. They must have liked my driving because, in the end, they offered me a job on the film. In 1985, I took a job as a production coordinator on a low-budget film produced by David Picker. Back then, there was no IMDb, but I did my homework and realized from his credits that David was someone with connections in Hollywood that I wanted to know. My instincts paid off sooner than I expected, because after we completed the production, David was appointed president of Columbia Pictures. He asked me what I wanted to become in 5 years' time. I said without hesitation, be a producer just like you. He said, well, then you need to come to Hollywood. For me, that yes was more difficult. I would have to leave my home and family in Atlanta to become a very small fish in a giant Hollywood ocean, not knowing quite what I'd be doing. David had offered me the first job, but what would I do after that, 3,000 miles away from home? But given my developing yes philosophy, I didn't give it another thought. I packed up the car and moved to Los Angeles. Some years later, I had the opportunity to say yes to being a bodyguard for none other than the bodyguard himself, Kevin Costner. I was tasked with accompanying him to our location in Mexico for a film we were working on together called Revenge. Little did I know, I would have to fend off every woman between LA and Mexico City. But it was worth it. I got to know Kevin very well over the next 4 months in Mexico. When the time came for him to put together a crew to work on his next film, his directorial debut, Dances with Wolves, he asked me to be part of his producing team. I said yes, emphatically. Along the way, I've learned one other thing you should certainly say yes to, a mentor. You may have had experience with mentors during your time at BU. I've had more than one, but my first was a producer here in Boston. I worked for Barbara Sirota as an intern at WGBH. Barbara opened my ideas to the idea that producer was a title I could aspire to. You never know, speaking of Barbara, you never know when or where your mentor may come in handy. Not long after leaving Boston, I had the opportunity to work on a small film in New York City. But the caveat was that I had to be a local with no provision for housing. By that time, Barbara was living in New York, and she let me sleep on her couch for 3 months. Barbara's generosity opened another door for me that would have otherwise been shut, and I thank her for that. But there's something even better than a mentor, and that's a sponsor. Mentors may open doors, but sponsors actually walk you through them. They may start out as your boss or supervisor, as with David Picker. You work hard for them. You do your best work. You make them look good, and they recognize that. They will make calls on your behalf. They will help you get interviews. They will go the extra mile so you don't have to walk alone. Sponsors are rare, and you can certainly have a successful career without one. But if you encounter such a person, by all means, say yes. Over the years, thanks to all of my yeses, I was able to gain more experience, which in turn gave me more confidence. Slowly but surely, I reintroduced no into my vocabulary because I increasingly had the ability to say yes only to the projects I really cared about, ones that aligned with my goal of becoming a movie producer. Eventually, I got to the point where it was easier to say no. Most memorably, in 1991, I interviewed at Disney Animation, and they offered me a production position on a movie called Simba, which eventually became a little movie called The Lion King. But I said no. At this point in my life, I felt it was time to focus on my career objective, being a producer. I made it clear to Disney that I wanted a producing role on my next project and to please call me if that ever became a possibility. Some months later, Disney called back and offered me a producing job, but it came with some strings attached. Instead of working at a studio in Los Angeles, I would have to move 400 miles north to work for a startup animation company that had never made a feature-length film. This was going to be unlike any film ever produced. It was to be animated entirely with computers. Even though there were some risks in taking the job, I was grateful for this opportunity to finally earn a producer credit. As you may have guessed, the startup was Pixar, and the film was Toy Story. After Toy Story, I produced Disney's animated film Tarzan, and then on to DreamWorks for Over the Hedge. Next was How to Train Your Dragon. Somewhat inconveniently, during the production of that film, the financing became available for a live-action film that I had been developing for a decade. I couldn't say no. It was The Last Station, a drama about Leo Tolstoy that was released in 2009, a year before How to Train Your Dragon. That was followed by the sequel, How to Train Your Dragon 2, in 2014. I had started on Toy Story in 1992. Looking back, it was a very busy 20 years and involved a lot of hard work. And by the way, my daughter was born somewhere in there. She's the best thing I ever produced. The successes of that period led to Jeffrey Katzenberg asking me to oversee all of DreamWorks feature film production, a job that requires me to say a lot of yes and no. So that's the story of my journey of vocabulary. Based on my experience, I urge you tomorrow to find that box in which you'll lock up the word no. It may be only 2 letters long, but it looms as a large and dangerous word early in your career. I realize that you may have a lot of good reasons to say no to something, but unknowingly, you may in fact be saying no to opportunity. You see, opportunity is a funny thing. It comes in all kinds of disguises. In my case, it once came disguised as a job driving a 15-passenger van. Another time as a cross-country move for a job I wasn't really sure about. And another as a gig having to fend off groupies from a movie star. On the surface, it seemed that none of these were important career moves, but I can say with certainty that had I said no to any of them, I wouldn't be where I am today, and Dean Fiedler would have had to look for another commencement speaker. To be sure, there's always a risk that things won't work out so well. But there's a beautiful thing about such risk. Early in your career, it isn't so risky. Most of the time, the worst thing that happens is nothing happens. When you're building up your resume, there's very little downside if something doesn't pay off. The only way to know is by doing it. And from my experience, most of the time, you'll be glad you did. Everything I'm telling you today can be summed up by one of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. Well, Lin-Manuel Miranda's version. As many of you probably know, in the Broadway show, there's a song in which Hamilton sings, "I'm not throwing away my shot." He was talking about breaking grounds for the 13 colonies. Well, starting today, you're breaking ground for your careers, and you definitely don't want to throw away your shot. This is what the word no can do, since it can close off possibilities that just might lead to your own Declaration of Independence. So have fun today, pack up tomorrow, then armed with your invaluable Boston University degree, head out into the world and just say yes. Congratulations, class of 2017. Good luck, and thank you very much.